What a glorious day to be here outside with all of you. And thank you to the head of school, Catherine McGeehee, Senior Class President Julia Clark, to Catherine Hastings, the Chairman of the Board, and the Board of Trustees for the invitation. And such a pleasure to be with all of you in person. This is actually the largest live event that I've spoken with since the pandemic, the first event that I've had in public since February of 2020. And there is just nothing that replaces the joy of celebrating together in person. And to the graduating seniors, congratulations. You should be very proud of what you've achieved. You did not let the COVID pandemic define you or dampen your spirits. And a heartfelt congratulations and a thank you to the parents, to the family. All of you provided the support that was needed in an extraordinary year that was like no other. Your celebration comes after a really turbulent time. In a single year, together, you have weathered a global pandemic, a global recession, an unprecedented policy response, volatile elections, and heightened tensions on racial and social issues. It's a time when each of us faced personal challenges that impacted us in different ways. So class of 2021, as you go into the world, it's important for all of you to understand the big picture legacy of this pandemic. In the history books, COVID-19 will be remembered as the event that defined and transformed the century. It has changed the way that we work, engage, and assemble. And I want to discuss some of the challenges that lie ahead, but also all of the reasons for optimism, and share a few lessons from my 30-plus years of working on Wall Street. The first thing I would say is that the word unprecedented is not being overused. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken more American lives than World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War combined. The cost of this crisis and the government's response is equally as enormous, with spending of $7 trillion over the last 2 years. Now that's 30% of GDP. That's the same as what was spent in World War II when we were financing a war. And that's equivalent to spending $1 million a day for the next 19,178 years. Or some of you, I see all the iPhones that are in the audience here, buying 7 billion of the latest iPhones. So the pandemic also, the consequences, has exposed and increased racial and gender inequalities. It has hit women harder than men. And those with less have been disproportionately hurt by joblessness. Female participation in the US labor force has been set back by 2.3 million women. This brings the US female labor force participation rate to the lowest level since 1988. The strides that were made in poverty reduction, which were quite remarkable over the last 20 years, are being reversed. More than 90 million people are likely to fall into extreme poverty, living on less than $2 a day across the globe. At the same time, the George Floyd murder exposed racial inequities and failures that have persisted for decades. But the silver lining in this crisis is that it's also given rise to innovation. It's ended complacency on growing inequities. It's provided a catalyst for difficult and complex conversations. Now, we can't fix our problems if we don't acknowledge them. It has never been a time where you can sort of speak and have more of a candid conversation and make new alliances and coalitions. And at the business level, it's accelerated change. We made changes in 10 months that we thought would take 10 years to achieve. And so did Foxcroft. You all adapted. The administration, the staff, the faculty all came and rallied around you. So as you move to the next stage in your life, I urge you not to be so fixated on mapping out a precise journey. Who could have mapped out this past year? And I offer some of my own experiences. I won't call it advice because I've made more than my share of mistakes, but I will share some lessons learned. First of all, your life is unlikely to be linear, and that's okay. My own career on Wall Street was completely accidental and unplanned. When I was your age, I was a terrible math student in high school, forever scarred by my Exeter math experience at my own boarding school, Phillips Exeter Academy. I didn't touch math again until graduate school. I thought I'd be a diplomat, a policymaker, or in the Foreign Service. And my first job out of college was actually teaching at a school much like Foxcroft. It was a place that I came back to. It was facilitating discussions around a round table known for student-led discussions. And I still look back on prep school as the place where I took hold of owning my own narrative. And that's what this experience for you at Foxcroft has been about, owning your own narrative. A skill for life, but it was not necessarily a career path. The second point I would make is that there is nothing that substitutes for hard work, preparation, and knowing your material. Hard work is still what prevails. I entered Wall Street with a non-traditional public policy degree. I felt unprepared, but very curious. And I found that I really loved the fast pace of markets. I loved the way that I had to create a narrative to explain markets to other people. Self-study is very important. You have to keep learning. You have to make the time and the space to learn. And as a research analyst, I probably spend more than half of my time reading. The teaching experience in the classroom also was very powerful for me because it was where all of my gaps were exposed in knowledge, and they were all tested and questioned, even in the field that I thought that I knew best. I would also just say to all of you, and I think all of you have demonstrated this past year, speak up and be a voice for your group. Before I arrived in Middleburg, I finished my last speaking event for Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And we cannot afford to be complacent in the Asian American community. This is truly a moment where the Asian American community cannot afford to let a crisis go to waste. Now, I've lived through 7 financial crises and researched them, but it's the first Pan-Asian collective moment that I've seen during my time working on Wall Street. And it's time to get organized. It's time for Asian Americans to end the silence, to self-advocate, and to call out racism for what it is. Going forward, be the person in the room who connects the dots. Learn how to build alliances and coalitions. And as Martin Luther King captures it, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Another thing I say to all of the young women in my group is, get comfortable being uncomfortable. It isn't going to be comfortable a lot of the time to be an effective leader. And it is still a lot harder for women to make their way into the room where it happens. We get the job done, but we never get to the room where it happens. Be gutsy, not just in your thoughts, but in your actions. Lean in and understand who the disruptor is in your specialty. And I tell young women they need to make themselves speak up twice in a meeting so that people do not think that the first time is a fluke. Learn to turn a disadvantage into an advantage. And just as you managed this past year to put a positive spin on the negativity that came from this pandemic, you can use that same resolve to turn a disadvantage into an advantage. Throughout my career, I was often the only female or the only Asian or the youngest person at a meeting. My job was to talk to ministers of finance and central bank governors. And you will be singled out. You will be remembered. This can be turned to your advantage, or it can be a huge disadvantage. I realized early on that if I said something careless, or I would be overly penalized. I would be labeled negatively. I might not get a second chance. Similarly, if I made a smart, well-thought-out comment, I would be the one who would be remembered. So speak up and don't be afraid to ask an intelligent question. Another thing that I do tell all of the women in the working world is, don't take it personally. Or, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously said, be a little deaf. Women and minorities tend to take feedback very personally. And I remember a meeting that I was at once where just everything went wrong. JP Morgan Chase was founded in the 1700s. It's a product of like 2,000 mergers or something like that. And at this meeting, everyone talked over me. I was about to make a point, somebody else got to it, somebody made the same point I made, he got credit for it. And I replayed over and over what I should have done differently, and I think a lot of women do that. And I ran into my key nemesis at a meeting later in the day, hands in his pockets, whistling away. And he turns to me and he says, "Hey, Changer." And I was like, oh, that's me, Changer. Good meeting, huh? Tough, but good. And I realize that for him, for a lot of men on Wall Street, it's just a game. So don't take it personally. A final point I would make is to take control of your finances. This is such an important part of owning your own narrative. And the smartest women and some of the most creative men and women in the world often get this part wrong. I'm on the board of directors of Girls Inc., and a couple of years ago, JP Morgan started a program to train 30,000 underserved high school girls in financial literacy. Managing your finances is a lifelong skill that you need to start early because it requires intentional behavior and efforts. So to execute your boldest and most creative ideas to affect change, this usually requires long-term financial commitment. So I know that at a personal level for many of you, and not all of you can be here today in the graduating class in person, it was likely a year that was filled with valid sadness and frustration for your final year of high school. My own children are around the same transition points, one finishing high school and college, and for all of those plans to travel, to be with friends before the next chapter, they were not to be. But it did give me treasured moments with my children at a critical time as their thinking evolved in response to the crisis. And I admired their resolve. And what I have come to really learn and respect most about the class of 2021 is the way that you similarly did not let a crisis go to waste. You were at your best. You were at your most creative and your most resilient this year. Now, I know some of you probably have TikTok or Instagram accounts, and even some of those probably went viral, but you took it upon yourselves to create your own opportunities. And that's a lesson learned, to create your own opportunities. I had a moment of real connectivity with the seniors at Foxcroft when I heard about your Courageous Conversation series. At JP Morgan, we actually have a series of conversations with exactly the same name, and it's just to discuss the rise of discrimination against Asian American and the Pacific Islander community and how we can move forward together to drive sustainable and positive change. And so I reflect back on a comment that was made to me by Jenny Romedy. She's the former chairman of IBM. She's now a member of JP Morgan's board, and she said to me, "Diversity is a number, inclusivity is a choice." And you seniors, you made the choice with Courageous Conversations to include others in a personal and intimate way, to take ownership of tackling tough issues related to mental health, to discuss issues around race and class and LGBTQ topics and much more. But most of all, you made it a priority to take care of each other and to bring the younger underclassmen under your wing. In the school's most valued and long-standing tradition, Foxhound, you reimagined the tradition to fit the COVID restrictions. You kept that magic alive for the younger students, and you transformed the senior porch into the center of an inclusive community, one that welcomed conversations from underclassmen to learn, to bond, and to start their own Foxcroft journeys at such an uncertain time. Now, you owe an enormous gratitude to the faculty, to the staff, to the administrators at Foxcroft. They are your second family. They kept this campus safe and open for you, and they cared for all of you during this pandemic. I cannot emphasize to you how important your Foxcroft experience will be as the foundation for what lies ahead. I look back at my own time at boarding school as the most important and most transformational educational experience I had. It was much more important than college or graduate school. It's where I learned to express my opinions. I had my assumptions challenged. I experienced more than my fair share of academic failures, and I learned how to recover and come out stronger. It was an experience that made me aware of my flaws, but also of what I was capable of achieving. But it is also the place where I developed some of the strongest relationships that I have kept throughout my entire life and will keep for many years to come. It is a lifelong prep school friendship and appreciation for my own experience in boarding school that brings me here to speak today. The boarding school bonds are special, and yes, they are unique. Even if you have not seen each other for a decade, even if you live all the way around the world, the connectivity is instant. And it never goes away. These will be the teachers that you remember the most, the stories you recount to your own children, the moments when you discovered yourself that you will play over and over in your life. Foxcroft will be your go-to support network for life, your friends until the end. Now, senior class, you have emerged from this pandemic stronger, more resilient, and more determined. Foxcroft has prepared you to own your own narrative, and you embraced that challenge to the maximum. You dug deep and discovered who you really are and what you might become. You developed creative ways to bring people together, and you are leaving Foxcroft a better place for the next generation to come. And so as you reach for your dreams, you will always remember this pandemic year that was like no other. And as you graduate from Foxcroft, just remember to be the change that you want to see in the world, in the words of Mahatma Gandhi. So thank you so much for having me here to share this extraordinarily special day in your lives. Good luck, stay positive, take care of yourselves, your families, and each other's, and congratulations to the amazing class of 2021.